friends. Welcome to the Recover Your Life podcast. My name is Bridgett, and I will be your host. Together, we are building a community of men and women who are learning to shift from a rule-based to a value-based approach in navigating faith, sexuality, and relationships. It's time to start living the life we long for. Let's dive in. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Recover Your Life podcast. If you're joining new today, we're in season 2 of our podcast, focusing a lot of our attention on what does it mean to move from rule-based living to values-based living and being more connected with the men and women that we want to be. And I'm so thankful on today's episode to have Blake Roberts here with us to join our conversation. Hi, Blake.
Hey, glad to be here. I'm excited for this.
I first connected with Blake a month or two ago at a local mental health event, and I said, wow, this dude carries the DNA of the Recover Your Life community, and so knew that I wanted to have a conversation with you today. And so you are a local marriage and family therapist here in Tennessee, and so just really excited for you to share a little bit of your story and for our people to benefit from our conversation today and hopefully get connected with you in real life. I always find so much joy in friends that we meet on the internet, and then we get to actually see them in real life too.
Yeah, that's very fun. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to talk today. I'm a therapist in the Nashville area. I've been in the Nashville area for close to a decade, maybe 9 years. My wife and I will be married 8 years. Yeah, 8 or 9 years this year. And we have a daughter, our first. She'll be 1 next month. So she's just,
love that.
I mean, like, talk about recover your life. Like, I thought that I had my bearings on and have like recovered a lot. And then I had a kid and I was like, wow, there's so much I don't know about myself, which has been a beautiful journey to explore. So in terms of like, we're going to talk about story today and how that influences recovering your life or not. The path of me getting to become a therapist was a little different. It wasn't something that I set out to do because I thought it sounded fun or like a good profession. It came from a very broken home, which in my work, I find that a lot of us do, even the people that come from, quote, good families.
Yes.
Which, like, there's brokenness everywhere. And hurt people, and that shows up in lots of different forms. And so I definitely experienced a lot of that in my family of origin, in my growing up years, which we may get into later. That kind of created a life that needed to be recovered from, and the way that I subconsciously attempted to recover from those wounds was through relationships, different forms of addiction, all of the things, and just really escaping myself and trying to find myself in all these other ways. And grew up in a Christian home, like raised with those values, and grew up in church, and just a lot happening in me that I was not aware of. A lot of formation in my story that I was not aware of, which was then forming decisions I was making. And ended up going to college on a football scholarship and had no idea what I wanted to do. Thought I was going to go into church ministry when I was at that school, and had an experience at a church that was not the greatest, wasn't what I thought it was when I got behind the scenes of it, and some wounding there, which maybe is for a later podcast. And just kind of was like stumbling my way through life still, and met my wife, girlfriend at the time. She didn't go to this. She was born and raised here in Nashville, actually one of the rare ones. And so we met and started dating, and that really started to change the direction of my life in a little bit, because it was the first serious relationship that I had. Not that I hadn't had relationships before, but they were for lots of the wrong reasons. And I hurt a lot of people in those relationships, and in some of the things that I was doing. My wife grew up going to counseling. It was normal for her. I did not. It was not a thing that was talked a lot about in my
Wow.
childhood
Mm-hmm.
emotions. So when we started dating, I actually this is when I went to counseling for the first time, maybe in my like early 20s, early to mid 20s, and started doing a lot of this work around my story. Also still in an active addiction at the time that I was not aware of, which um, my counselor kindly brought to my attention, which then got me into a 12-step program after going to like a little treatment center. So started to begin to recover my life in a different way through that work, which was just like a whole new realm to me. Really, it was a whole new realm because I was being invited into parts of my story that really needed to be healed and needed to be witnessed by me and by other people. And so through that process, I'd been in recovery for, I don't know, 5 years maybe, until I had the thought of like, what if I was on the other, and I've been in counseling for a while this time, what if I was on the other end of the chair?
Wow.
Which because of my shame took a long time to even bring that up to my wife, because I also was like, who am I to do that? But thankfully I had enough people in my life at that time who really knew me, who validated it and were like, yeah, I can totally see you doing this. And so got me on the path to grad school, and went to grad school here in Nashville, got a degree in marriage and family therapy, and have been basically in private practice since then. And so now I work primarily with men. I see some teenage boys, but primarily men in kind of 20s to 40, late 40s, doing a lot of kind of the similar work that I walked through, which is coming alive and connecting to these unaddressed and unprocessed parts of their stories, which are influencing their current lives, maybe impacting their relationships or their work, or just their ability to connect with themselves, which is what they kind of come in wanting to fix. And then we kind of go a little bit of a different route, but in the same vein of like, it changes those things. But I think I heard Dan Allender say once that in order to change your present, you have to be willing to look at your past. And so I do a lot of kind of past work with men, and helping them come home to themselves and these parts that have been neglected, that have been wounded, that are really important and valuable. And I really believe that I see it for myself and with guys every day, that process then allows them to be more of who they want to be today, and in their relationships and their lives. So I'm sure there's lots of parts of that I left out, but that's kind of a summary view.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think it's really cool. Just the importance, I think a lot of the conversations that we're having on this season of the podcast is a lot of what does it look like to build self-trust with yourself, and like how does that change the way that you show up in relationships, in faith communities, in regards to your sexuality. Like so much of that really is in the realm of like you're the only person that you spend all day every day with. And so what does it look like? I use the phrase like, what does it look like to build a kind friendship with yourself? And I think that's really cool. The idea that, here you are in your mid 20s and now you're pursuing a romantic relationship, and obviously that's impacting it, but it's not I'm not hearing you say that I pursued health just for the sake of the relationship. I actually had to pursue health for me first. And that of course impacted the relationships that you were navigating, but it has to be about you. And just the fact that we really do exist in this storyline, which I think is really important. Because when we think about it as, well, it's just me, like I'm the only person on the planet, no one's ever experienced pain like this. No one's ever, I'm just terrible. I'm caught up in behaviors that I don't want to be caught up in or whatever. Like it can be a really lonely experience. And so, I love the idea of actually helping people come back, because I think it also helps us to not to not moralize the unhelpful behavioral choices that we might be making to soothe ourselves.
Right.
It's very easy, especially if you grow up in a faith context, of like, hey, I'm doing this thing that I know I'm not supposed to be doing, and I know it's not helpful, but I don't even know I don't even know why I'm here or what I'm doing, and I know I don't want to be here anymore, but I don't know what to do. I love Jason Valentin says, if you could have fixed it by now by yourself, you would have. And so that's really important, and why we need coaches and counselors in our life to say, hey, it's okay. This thing is just big. It needs community and partnership in it. So I just think that's really cool. When we, are in kind of the counseling bubble, there's a phrase that I hear all the time, I use all the time, but sometimes I feel guilt of if people aren't in the counseling bubble, do they understand the same phrase? And so it's the idea of what we call story work. Would you kind of give us a little bit of a definition of what story work is and how that might be different than what we see on TV of showing up in an office, laying on a couch with a counselor taking notes type of thing that we might think of when it's just kind of word vomiting out all our problems, but not actually getting anywhere.
Yeah. It's funny you said that. I actually had a client the other day that came in and he was like, I'm just curious, do people ever lay on your couch? And I was like, no, actually, I kind of would love it if somebody did, because it would tell me that they're really comfortable.
Yeah.
But there is definitely this. It's definitely destigmatized, but there is still a stereotype of or an assumption of what happens in therapy. The way that I would describe story work right now is, meaning my definition may change later, but right now is when you go to a movie.
Yeah.
And let's just say there's a main character in the movie. And there's a similar plot line in every single movie, regardless of the genre. And as the audience, you have a lot of the details of the movie that the main character doesn't. And so you can kind of see the trajectory and where it's going, and you can kind of put pieces together, or if something happens, you may be able to be like, oh, well, yeah, this is happening because of this thing that happened earlier, because as an audience, we see all those other pieces of it.
That's good.
But the character themselves don't know that. And they're just kind of going through what they have. And so in some ways, I think that story work is, you're the main character in your movie, so to speak, and you're also kind of taking on this role of the audience, where you're looking at all of the different, and not just looking at, but working through the different little stories that impact the larger story. So a lot of what that looks like practically in the room, at least the way I work, is that people may come in with a pressing issue, whether it be a situation or a thought or just a struggle they're having.
Yeah.
That's real time, and not every time, but often when we're patient enough with that process and we really engage it and find some of this compassion toward these parts of us even that we don't like, we start to see threads and connections. And there's lots of research around neural pathways and how things are connected, and the importance of that is not just to go, okay, well, now I have this piece of information, what does that do? That doesn't change anything. But a lot of these things live in the parts of our brain that don't really tell linear time, and so there's a reason when you're 42, but you feel like you're 15 in a situation, because to your body, to your nervous system, it feels the same way, because essentially it is your body's in that stress response, even though the situation may not match. So I hear people all the time are like, oh, I'm just overreacting, or this isn't even that big of a deal, or I'm being dramatic. I'm like, no, you're not. I mean, maybe in terms of if you're looking at paper, the situation, but what you're responding to and reacting to isn't really the situation. The situation is just what's on the surface. And so story work is really being able to start to look at and be more comfortable with what is beneath the surface. And it's not that the movie, going back to that analogy of our lives, is always unfolding. So it's not that you're just going to uncover all of this stuff so that you can then know the end and then you're kind of done. But it's just like becoming more comfortable in this process of engaging your story, which is really just like being more present to all of the things that are happening subconsciously, right? That are influencing our behaviors. There's often, I'm starting to see this and like believe this more and more, that I don't know if we ever have just a pure motivation for something, meaning that like the reason I'm doing this podcast, let's use this as an example. Part of the motivation is like, because I want to help people, I want to give back. I want people to hear it and be able to take something from it. And if I'm being like 100% honest with you, like there's definitely motivations of like, I want my voice to be important. I want people to hear me and hear what I have to say is valuable. And maybe it'll turn into something that comes back to me like a client, right? So it's like, it's not just the pure motivation of I want to help. And I used to think of that as like bad or negative or selfish or something. But now I'm just like, no, because I'm okay with engaging my story, I can look at those and then just be like, okay, well, how much of the which motivation is kind of like driving the bus? And when I'm not aware and engaging my story, I'm not aware of those other motivations because I don't even have the conscious awareness that like I'm doing this because I want my voice to be important, right? The only reason I know that is because now I'm intimately involved with the stories in my past of which I had an experience or multiple where I felt this real true sense of like, man, my voice doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that I always like to say, what makes this make sense? Because I think so much there is where I go, my gosh, why did I just say that? Or, what's happening with me? I don't really know. And being able to say, oh, there is a storyline that's taking place. When you think about the movies, two movies that come to mind, we love a good kids movie. Wonka, the newest Willy Wonka one.
I haven't seen the new one yet.
Oh, please do. It's the story work of Willy Wonka. That's what it is.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And then the Cruella movie on Disney Plus.
Yeah, I saw that one. That was great.
Right? So we see this whole story that she lived where you go, I probably wouldn't be very kind either. You go, oh, there's a whole lot to that. And so I love that analogy of like kind of looking at my story where I go, oh, okay, there's parts of me that I look back in judgment, which I think we all do, of like, oh yeah, I judge myself for that. But then I go, oh, okay. What I'm hearing you say is that's probably a place in us that didn't have our needs met at the time. And so how do we be kind to those places? So I guess that's a question for you is when we're looking back on our story and we go, oh, I don't like that version of me, or even maybe it's even a more intense reaction. I hate the whatever version of me. What does it look like for us to connect kindly to that place instead of judgment?
It's a great question. Okay, so I think I would say that first we have to notice the feeling toward whatever this thing is that we don't like. So let's say it's like it's a behavior or something, or like a response in relation or communication style or whatever. So that's the isolated thing over here, and then we have to be able to be aware that I don't like that part of me and separate from that part. So I know I'm going to use parts language, and maybe people who aren't watching can't see, but try to track with me where let's just call it like this critical part, and then this like behavior we don't like. There's the critical part that is critical of the behavior. Just separating and being able to acknowledge the criticism as like its own thing helps some of that feeling of criticism lessen a little bit. Because when I'm just saying like, oh, I'm just critical, or like, I don't like this part of me, it feels like all of me doesn't like this. But it's really just like there's a part of me that doesn't like this thing because, and then you can start to be curious. So once you have a little bit of like a distance and you can externalize this critical part,
Mm-hmm.
Then it's like, okay, well, let's be curious about the critical part.
Mm-hmm.
The critical part doesn't like the behavior because, and then you just listen. Like
Yep.
it feels maybe a little crazy, but like you can have a relationship with these different parts of ourselves, and
Mm-hmm.
then you start to understand, like, oh yeah, the critical part doesn't like this behavior because it causes tension in it causes disconnection in my relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we're not, I want to pause for 1 second because
Yeah.
this is super important, and parts work has been so helpful in my own journey.
Mm.
So we're kind of starting our conversation with the assumption that people know that it's criticism. But if people are like, "Oh, I'm not there yet," what might be happening in our bodies that let us know we're
That's a great
wrestling
question.
with some tension of, I have this memory of how I've shown up in my life that's not actually who I want to be? How might our bodies tell us before we can actually label it?
It's a wonderful question. I'm really glad you asked that. I mean, it might be tension. Like there
Okay.
might be like tension in the chest, or
Mm-hmm.
it can often be, and it's going to show up a little different for everybody. So I do want to say that.
Yeah.
But it can be like warm,
Mm-hmm.
because when I think, like, when my parts that are critical, when I'm critical of other parts of me, it's usually like anger, like angry criticism, which is like
Mm-hmm.
this kind of like warm energy, or this like tightness,
Yeah.
tension, kind of like heavy feeling. Or it may just be phrases that I hear of like, I don't like this part, or like, this needs to go away.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't like when I do this.
Mm-hmm.
Those sorts of things where um, it doesn't feel open, it doesn't feel calm, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel curious. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that helps?
Yeah, that's great. I'm just going to share something that came up this year, and we can
Sure.
kind of use it. We can use it as a
Yeah.
case study, and then we can
Okay.
work through it together.
Let's do it.
So one of the, I would say, places of healing that I've dove into this year for myself was I realized I would use the word hatred. I had a lot of hatred towards 16-year-old Bridgett, being what I sarcastically referred to as an emotional side hoe. So terrible. In a friendship in high school that I romanticized, and was just willing to be like, oh, I'll participate in this to have connection for my own needs. But I would say that, like, oh, I'm the emotional side hoe of, I'm not this man's girlfriend. I'm willing to take the scraps to get my emotional needs met. But also I knew that I was serving the role of meeting his emotional needs when the other women in his life didn't meet that. And so there's been, in adulthood, in navigating dating relationships where I do want to live in alignment with my values and I do want to show up, there's been this thing that keeps popping up that's like, you were an emotional side hoe, you're not doing that again. Take up lots of space, have lots of needs, and it's like very, very loud. And so I was just trying to think about, like, what is the place that, what is the part that has the intensity on her? And I would say I call it my traffic cop. And traffic cop has lots of rules, will blow the whistle at you if you're not paying attention perfectly, if you're not crossing the road at the right time, if you're not, like, she just is very, like, has zero grace for anything except for perfection. Like, you got to be perfect, because it feels that heightened, like we were talking about. I feel it in my body of, it feels like I feel my whole diaphragm lift up. I feel my body move forward of, like, judgment, attacking. There's just all of this in it. And so I've had to do a lot. I even, like, pulled a picture out of 16-year-old Bridgett, and I just was like, oh, hi, buddy. Like, tell me what's happening in your world. Like, what is happening for you that we're choosing to participate in that? So you can do whatever you want with that. I'm happy to go there, because I think that's important. That I think everybody has things like that that are now popping up. So what do we do when we have something like that pop up in our story?
It's a great example. And so going back to something you said when you first started talking about it, was, if I was hearing you correctly, is that you kind of named, like, what you were like what you were doing for him. And then I think you said like you were also getting your emotional needs met.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. As much as you want to share, like what would you say looking back were some of the emotional needs that were being met through that relationship? As
Oh, yeah.
dysfunctional, air quote, as you want to say it was, like what emotional needs still were being met?
Yeah. I think I like to talk about our masculine feminine needs. And
Mm-hmm.
so having a birth father that was very emotionally abusive and very absent. And then around 16 was when I cut contact with him.
Wow.
Which I'm literally just having this light bulb right now. Thanks for the counseling. um, and
Wow.
so it was like, cool, there's this man that I can care for, that will also care for me and see me more than my father does. Because I felt very much in that dynamic with my birth father of I needed, like, I took care of him,
Yep.
but he just had judgment on me and my role. Like my role, even as a daughter, I always say that like I do believe that I operated more in that emotional enmeshment of him kind of using me as a partner, not a like a romantic partner, and not as a kid. Like I didn't have permission to be a kid. I had to serve the needs of him to have affection.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, that makes a lot of sense why 16-year-old Bridgett said, this is a great way to get my needs met.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my alert went off, so I hope that wasn't distracting. And it makes like hearing. So again, this is just like once you get more, when you get more of the story. That's why I have a newsletter that I called More to the Story, because there's always more to the story. So when you're just looking at when you're looking at on paper at this relationship that 16-year-old Bridgett had, that maybe somebody externally would look at and be like, why are you in that? Like, from the outside to be like, what are you doing? This rationally doesn't make sense or whatever. But when you learn the other pieces of it, you're like, oh, it makes perfect sense. And it makes sense why you would maybe sometimes look back at 16-year-old her and I think you used the word hate. Did you use that word? Yeah,
I
like
did
this
use that
hatred
word
toward her. And what happens when we have that hatred or that criticism toward those parts? If what we're saying was true earlier, that there's never just a pure motivation. So to use this example, if meeting his needs was what you were doing so that then you could feel whatever it was the only motivation. If we're saying that like isn't true, then the other motivations of like there were some real desires and needs that were being met that are good.
Oh yeah.
And that are like valuable. And so when we look back at those parts of and be like, I hate that, then I'm also and then I kind of subconsciously like lock that part away or like wish it off into Neverland. Then what goes with it are those good desires and needs that are kind of tied up in that. Right. But when you start to look at it with curiosity and compassion and you can just like hold space for it, you can then kind of parse out like, okay, well, yeah, I can see this thing that I was doing that I don't want to do. Like that can kind of drift off. I don't need that anymore. But desire that I had or this emotional need that I had is still really good. And like she was trying to get it met however she knew how. But now you have different ways that that it can be met without the kind of subsequent like pain that comes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I look back on that and I go like, oh wow, like the friendship was really beautiful and I'm super glad I said yes to that friendship and that was good. And I think about, even just my church context of like hardcore purity culture things of like I didn't have relational skills of how to be friends with men and not have it be a romantic thing. Like I didn't know how to do that. And
Yeah.
so, being able to look at that and go,
Yeah.
okay, cool. You were trying to navigate a very healthy psychological skill of being friends with a different, like opposite gender, of pursuing friendship and connection, of we were involved in, some of the same hobbies and groups and things. And so there was this shared like community and belonging and identity of you get me. And so it's cool that we have that. And so, yeah, I think that, what that looks like for me now as an adult engaging with her is to literally be like, wow, like what was happening for you in those things? Is there anything of this that I'm missing, right? Is there any information that now as an adult, I'm just kind of like, well, that was just whatever she made. And then asking the like, well, what do you need from me? What do you, because I think that there's this space of when we don't engage the story, like you said, we will shut ourselves off from any new experience that looks anything like that experience because you're so trapped in, I will never, ever, 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 ever do that again.
Right.
And so now when I have new context in new situations to go, Bridgett actually can say what she needs. She can invite friendships. She can have new experiences. And she doesn't have to violate her needs in order to do that. But I think that the activation still in our bodies, like you said before, is I think my body for sure still responds like 16 sometimes.
Totally. Yep.
How do we know the difference between I'm reacting to what's happening in the present and my body's carrying a story of an emotion that happened to me before?
Before I answer that, I want to go back to one thing. So you may have to ask that question again.
I will.
Let me remember what I wanted to go back to. Oh, when you kind of made that connection of like around the same time and how like that was maybe a little similar to your relationship with your dad and yada, yada, yada. I would argue that the relational dynamic that you kind of started to describe with your dad is and maybe was, I think I would use that word, more fundamentally like hurtful and painful than the relationship with this guy.
Yeah.
Although it was as well. And so when we kind of look back at that and are like, yeah, I hate that, Bridgett. It's like, well, yeah, that response makes sense because what's connected to it is this other thing that's actually even bigger. And so if I can hate her then and it's not that this is intentionally happening. This is just like how our system protects us. But it's like, then I don't have to engage that, because to engage emotional enmeshment with a parent, which I have as well, and a lot of us do, is like an even bigger thing than, not that it's more important, but it's just more impactful. That's all I wanted to say there.
No, that's great.
And then your question was, how do we know when we're reacting to something in the present versus the past? Man, you're hitting me with great questions today. If we can name it, we can tame it. First and foremost, I have to be aware of my reaction. Like I have to be able to have the awareness and the willingness to reflect on my reaction to a situation. Now, not all, so we're talking about self-regulation there, sort of. Sometimes I need somebody else who's safe to help me be aware of my reaction. Often, though, we just don't like other people highlighting in a reaction that we have that we're not aware of, so we just get defensive. So I have to be able to be aware and go, ooh, yeah, this is how I'm reacting in this moment, whether it be something I don't like or maybe I'm like more timid than I want to be or whatever. And this doesn't always happen this easily, but I think some questions we can ask to kind of like help our system assess like where are we right now is, I'm trying to think of like an example situation. Okay, I'll use my situation from earlier. I'll be discreet though.
Yeah.
Like I had a moment where something happened relationally with someone,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and then they did something, and I mean, my body was flooded, like,
Mm-hmm.
and because I'm aware of my story,
Yeah.
what I started to realize was like, ooh, I feel like I just did something wrong.
Yeah.
Um, I really like this person I don't think this person felt heard by me.
Mm.
Um, I felt pretty stuck.
Yep.
Felt pretty like shameful of what I did or didn't do. I also felt just kind of angry at the situation.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I mean, I told you even before the call, I was like, I think I almost thought like I had to cancel our session
Yeah.
or this recording because I was like, I can't do it. So to me, like that initial overwhelm of emotion is like, okay, there's a lot happening right now. I'm aware of my body. 10 years ago, that same reaction would have happened and I wouldn't have even been aware of it, or I would have just like quickly numbed out with something. I would have pulled up my phone and gone to Instagram. But instead, like I have enough tools now, like slow down, journal about it real quick. I laid on the floor and I'm just like taking some deep breaths, trying to ground myself. And I'm just being curious. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Like, what am I afraid is going to happen here? And it's like, well, I may lose this relationship and it may be like, it may be over. And in the context of this relationship, like if that happens, it's okay. But this like, this young like boy in me that was like, we did something wrong.
Yep.
This is overwhelming. This is like, there's too much happening in us at this moment. I was able to, and I wasn't even like doing this consciously. It was just kind of happening of like, things are different now. We're okay. This is what the truth is of the situation. This is, but it wasn't, I think the distinction here for me is it wasn't this voice or this part of me that was like, you're overreacting. It's not a big deal. Things are fine. Kind of that like rational, like the rationalizing kind of like you're overreacting. It was just like this gentle, like, I understand that this is overwhelming. Like I can be with that. I can like hold some space there.
Yeah.
And I can remind myself like, it's okay. Even if this does happen, I can handle it now. Prior versions of me wouldn't have been able to handle it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, that's great. Yeah, one of the things we talk about in connection codes is that you don't need better intentions, you need better tools. And I think so much of, this idea of just get rid of your negative thoughts and think positive and, fake it till you make it. All those big, very cultural, like even if you're not consciously aware, like those are still cultural messages that your body
100%.
has heard thousands of times.
Yep.
And so being able to say, oh, like, I'm not losing my mind because I'm incompetent. I'm losing my mind because I don't have tools. Or there are all these other thousands of memories that my body has had that when I experience shame, fear, whatever it is, that my literal psychological response has been abandonment, whether that's been from someone on the outside, a caregiver, or the psychological dissociation. I'm leaving my body now. I'm actually going to abandon myself in the need.
Right.
And so we have those things that happen over and over and over again, that it makes sense that we would, in the present moment, go, no, this feels way too big, way too scary. And I think, that it does feel really vulnerable to share with another person, because I think that there is this message that says, you're a grown-up now, you should just know how to handle this. Like you should just do this without being triggered, or that the healthier you get, the less triggered you get. And I just really think that's not how it works. I think that you just get kinder to yourself when you're triggered. I don't actually know. Yes, I think there are some times, but I always tell my clients, like, the goal isn't that this stops being hard and scary. The goal is that we can be really kind and compassionate to ourselves when the hard and
Mhm.
scary thing happens to us.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Yeah. And I don't want to make a generalization, but I guess in prefacing with that, it means I'm about to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe it's just because I primarily work with men, but men have the
Mm-hmm.
hardest time with that. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we did not have, I'm saying we, and I'm just going to like speak for a lot of men right
Yeah.
now, but like we did not have kind fathers
Mm-hmm.
who were, and the reason they weren't kind was because they didn't know how to be kind with themselves because maybe nobody was kind to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I mean, like the the amount of times I've had session with a guy and what we're really just focusing on is like slowing down, being
Mm-hmm.
curious, being compassionate, finding that kindness in you, and like, and then like the things that happen from there, or like the memories they have, or the emotions they experience is like, I mean, it just like leaves me speechless sometimes.
Yeah.
Whereas if we in the beginning, and I was just like, let's just try to like think about this or like think our way to it or fix it,
Yeah.
like we won't get there. I mean, that's where most
Mm-hmm.
guys come in too, is like, and it's sad because like I have some friends who, my best friend has a 2.5-year-old boy right now, and I mean you can just see it, like he's so, yeah, he's a toddler, but he's like so kind. um
Mm-hmm.
and my friend is also a therapist, and so we talk about this kind of thing a lot. Like
Yeah.
there are so many moments where my friend, who is a therapist who also has been in recovery, like very self-aware,
Yeah.
has these moments where I would use the language like robs his 2-year-old like of his kindness, of his 2-year-old's
Mm-hmm.
kindness, because of the way he reacts,
Mm-hmm.
which is always more about him.
Yeah.
And that's why we say like the repair is always more important than the rupture. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna happen. I'm gonna
Yeah.
not be kind to myself,
Mm-hmm.
to my wife, to my kids. And the more I'm aware of my story
Yep.
and why I have a hard time repairing,
Mm-hmm.
the more I'm going to be able to go back and make those repairs. In fact, I'm talking in abstract forms, but
No, that's great. I know a lot of my guy friends that are having children right now talk about how painful it is that they're aware of all of the ways that they weren't fathered and how triggered they are by fathering their children.
yeah,
Of like, oh no.
yeah,
So my reaction here is not like, yes, sure, you can be hurt that your kid didn't like dinner or didn't listen to you or what, like
right,
you get to, you have the right to exist and have emotions too,
sure,
in the moment, but just kind of
100%.
this like eye-opening realization of, oh no, now I'm actually aware of the story that I lived in it. And I think, we're never going to get to the end of the story. And, I think, life is the endless discovery of each other's stories.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so there is this space of we're just
Yeah.
never, and I hate that. I am a type A. I like things orderly. I like a task list. I like a rule book. I like just get it done. And then it's like, that's not how life works. It's the little bit at
Mhm.
a time, slowly uncovering. And we do the best that we can with what we have.
Yeah.
And I wish that cleaned up all the messes.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I thought of a story when you were just sharing that about fathering, in this like conversation I had recently with a client who's a new dad and working
Mhm.
through his relationship with his dad, and a very common story that a lot of men experience of being
Mhm.
bullied when they were younger, and
Mhm.
starting to work through like how that impacted their confidence, and how they were maybe missed in
Mm.
those experiences of being bullied, and
Yeah.
kind of what the responses were, and all of that, and all of the ways of like, I don't want my son to experience what I did.
Mm.
And so here's kind of like what I want to do. Here's like what I want to build up in him, or here's the kind of dad that I want to be, so other kids like don't want to bully him because they know what his dad's like. And now we're going back to the motivation thing is like, okay, there's a couple things that are true here. One is the pure good motivation of really caring for your kid and not wanting him to be bullied and not wanting him to be hurt. And the other motivation is the desire to heal his own experience of being bullied through protecting his son from being bullied. It's kind of the same thing that we see a lot with specifically dads in sports, of like dad that really wanted this career as an athlete and it didn't happen, but now they have a really athletic son and they're kind of living vicariously through their son. And it's like the same thing that happens. And what we talked about is like the best thing that you can do in order to help your son. What it really came down to is like, I want him to like be able to own and like appreciate his sensitivity, but not be run over by people.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, the best way we're going to do that is to look at our own stories of harm regarding our sensitivity. Because the reality is he's going to be bullied most likely, or he's going to be hurt.
Yep.
And it's not a matter of helping him avoid those things. That's not what helps him recover his life.
Yep.
It's how am I with him in those moments? Connection before correction. And
absolutely.
most of us experience correction first, and then that just shuts us down. And it doesn't mean that we don't correct, but like it's all about the connection first.
Yep. Absolutely. I feel some sadness. I feel like there's so many things more that we can say.
I know.
I think kind of where I want to end is one more thought I'll share, and then I'd love to just, if there's anything, if you're like, before we leave today, your heart's burning to say it.
Okay.
The conversation we just had was about, working with young children. But I also just want to say that if you are listening and you have adult children, that the repair can still take place.
Yes.
I know for me as an adult doing my own healing work and now getting, a couple years into it and going, okay, now I'm actually ready to talk to my parents about this and being able to say, hey, this is kind of what I've experienced of you that's been painful, and this is what I need to stay in connection to you. And opening the door for them to look at their own narratives of, yes, this is the way that I've engaged with you because of what formed me. It really did. Not that the pain is gone. Like, obviously there's still moments of like, like the way that I was parented, there are parts of that were really painful. But being able to have the conversation of, now that I'm an adult and I can look back at 35-year-old you parenting me, I go, buddy, like, I hear you. Like, there's so many things that were happening. I can also hold compassion for that too. And so know that even if you miss it when they're kids, that there is the possibility for repair as adult by just simply engaging the story and doing your own work. And whether you are the adult child in this dynamic or you are the parent of an adult child, that even jumping into a coaching or a therapy session now to work through your own story and engage, like, you can do a ton of repair if you're willing to do the rest, because it is hard.
Yeah. Very well said.
As we wrap up today, anything that you're like, my heart's dying to say it, or we've got listeners who are going, I've never heard about this before. This whole idea of story work is very new to me. What do you have for those people?
So, I would say if you're listening to this, then you're doing story work. If you're just listening to this, things have been, trying to make their way up to the surface, whether you're intentionally trying to find it or not. So listening to things like this, reading, and ultimately, like you mentioned, like doing the work, and especially when there are stories of real harm, doing the work in a therapeutic context is really helpful for that story work. And I think there's different like layers of story work you can do, right? Like you can do it by listening to this and reflecting and like talking with somebody about what came up. And you can sit in a therapy session and do EMDR, IFS or something, or you could get on a coaching call, right? Like there's so many ways that you can do it. I think it's just all about the intentionality of slowing down and viewing it as something that you need. Like you need it just because you need it. And then the people around you need it. Because the more connected we are to ourselves, the more connected we are to others. And I really do believe that the more connected we are to ourselves, the less harm we cause others, and the less harm we will take on.
Correct.
Because when I'm aware of my story and I'm connected in some of these things like you're sharing, like I then know, oh, this is an experience where historically I would like maybe get run over here, or I would like not say what I need, or I would be taken advantage of. And it's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. Because I know what that does. And I now have this different experience of how I can advocate for myself. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So grateful for your time and space and engaging in this conversation. Look forward to more connection in the future. If we have friends that would like to connect with you, how do they find you online and how do they work with you?
Yeah. Best way would just be you can go to my website, blakerobertscounseling.com. And there's a contact form you can submit there if you want to inquire about counseling services. Also mentioned earlier, I have a newsletter where ideally a couple times a month I'll send out something that is just kind of like a dose of inspiration or encouragement or like a practical tip, something that helps you to be more present and do a lot of this, what we've been talking about, like to actually put it into practice. And then at Blake the Counselor on Instagram is just like another place where sometimes I share things. But my website would probably be the best way.
Amazing. Love it. Love it. Well, friends, so grateful that you hung out with us today. If this conversation was impactful for you, would you send it to your friends, put it in the group chat, put it on your Instagram story, wherever it is? I always say that podcasts can be a really great entry point to complicated conversations, because sometimes it's like, hey, I want to talk about story work. I want to talk about some of these big things, but I don't know how to do it. And so being able to text a friend or text a parent or a sibling and say, hey, I was listening to this conversation. I'd love to talk to you about this podcast episode can be a really great way to enter into that conversation. And now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing that if someone sent you this podcast episode and now you're listening to it, just engage the conversation, and now you get to tag someone else. tag it to them.
And I would add, I don't know what percentage of your listeners is who, but send this to a guy in your life. Send it to your husband or your boyfriend or just your friend or your brother. And you can even just say the guy who was the one talking told me to send this, so they don't think you're just like telling them they need to fix something, but because he needs to hear this. And unfortunately, a lot of us guys aren't like going out and searching these things. It's how a lot of it came to me too, is like somebody kind of brought it into my world. And I was honestly just desperate enough at the time where I was curious enough to like engage it and change my life. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Blake. See you guys next time on the Recover Your Life podcast. I'm so glad you could join us for today's conversation. Be sure to check out your show notes to learn more about today's guest, how you can connect with them, and other resources they have to support you in your journey to living the life you long for. If you're interested in booking a coaching session with me, you can book your free discovery call today by using the link in our show notes. Friend, your story is so worth sharing, and I hope that today you feel a little bit more supported in navigating conversations about faith, sexuality, and relationships. I would love to partner with you on this journey. So if there's anything you need from me, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. I can't wait to see you next time on the Recover Your Life podcast.